Well, the local authority really has got minimal options. The schools' budgets are set via a national formula. There is some local tinkering and arrangements that can be come to, but that has to be come to collectively by all the schools in the city through a process called the Schools Forum, which sets the proportions of budgets that might be spent in different areas, for example in special needs and that sort of issue. And so individual schools have their budgets largely set on what I loosely describe as a bums on seats funding formula. So the more pupils you've got, the more money you receive. But the add-on, the specials, the special circumstances, there is some additional sort of tinkering that can happen around that.
So Valentine School, for example, says that they've got a higher proportion of children with educational health plan.
Yes, so that therefore they would be more impacted by the collective decision that's made around children with special needs, if that is the case.
And what they are saying is that every financial year they have a budget allocated to them, and some of it is clawed back at the end.
So basically there is a budget and there's a central pot that money is clawed back into. That applies to every school in the city, in fact across the country, and that is to pay for the central services that the local authority operates on behalf of schools.
So when a school when a school gets a deficit budget, they have to work with the local authority to submit a deficit recovery plan. Normally that deficit recovery would be expected in 3 years, so you would normally expect to be back with a balanced budget within 3 years. We've been working with the local authority to try and agree a deficit recovery plan. Our concern is the amount of cuts that we'd have to make would hinder our ability to meet children's needs and to hit our academic targets. So that's been a really difficult pressure for us.
Have you been told specifically what cuts to make?
We've been told to look at staffing. It would probably be over the next 3 years. It would be in the region of 30 staff that we would have to lose if we were to make our budget balanced.
How many staff do you have now?
Well, I suppose about 140.
We have 151.
151.
Right across the board. That's
okay.
Cleaners,
dinner ladies,
everybody.
I think the crunch point is already here. We've submitted a deficit recovery plan that would mean lots of jobs would go here, redundancies, that type of thing. That makes us very worried. It makes our governors very worried that we're still going to be able to meet the needs of children at our school. We're under pressure, obviously, to raise standards academically. We're on a really good trajectory now. We're improving our standards. That's all getting better. That's because of the skilled staff that we've got here. If we have to make lots of redundancies, that's going to be very tricky to do. Mainly support staff. So it's the main focus, I would say, has been support staff that we're expected to cut from our budget. We've already, for example, one thing that's having a really negative impact at the moment, we've had to cut our speech and language support post. So we had a member of staff and her job was to support children mainly coming into years R&1 whose speech and language they had big issues with speech and language. That inhibits all of their academic development. There's lots of research that shows that adults who are in prison, for example, have poor speech and language skills. So it's a really key part of our work, but we've had to cut that post. So there are children in school now who aren't getting the speech and language support that they were getting a year ago. That's a real significant cut that we've had to make.
You submitted this plan to the local authority, so what next?
So at the moment they're not accepting it. They're thinking we need to do more than that. So we've been asked by our governing body to go back and look at it again to see if we can make more cuts more quickly. The best case scenario is that at this point in time, the local authority allow us to have a licence deficit, which they're absolutely allowed to do within legislation. Say to us, we recognise the funding situation that you're in, we're going to allow you to have a licence deficit, which we will manage with you, whilst we campaign for more funding from national government.
Even though we're an expanding school, we're growing year on year by a class size each year, we can only have a certain percentage more budget each year. And then what they do is if it goes above a certain percentage compared to the previous year, then they take the difference back and use it with other schools where their budgets may have dropped. We've talked to the LA about lifting this cap for us because that has had a huge impact on our in-year deficit, and they've advised us to go back and talk to Schools Forum because they ultimately make the decision on where that cap lies and what the percentage is.
So if they lifted that cap, it would mean that the money given in the first place to Valentine, would stay
stay with Valentine. Yeah. So if they lift the cap, it would actually mean that the money that's allocated to Valentine at the beginning of the year would then stay in Valentine, being used for Valentine's children.
So if you hold your position and you say, I can't do any longer, what are the likely consequences?
My job would be at risk.
Okay.
Because part of my job is to set a balanced budget. Now, in normal situations, I've always been able to do that. It's only in the last few years that we've been in a funding crisis that I've not been able to do that. And it's not through financial mismanagement. We simply are not being given enough money to run our school. Because over the last 3 years, we've cut our resources budget, we've cut our training budget, we've cut our photocopying budget. So all of those things have already been cut because the one thing we need is people, because it's about relationships. Education is about relationships. We need people.
Cut IT as well.
We've cut IT, we've cut training, we've cut everything. And so when you've cut everything, and the local authority can't find anywhere else for us to cut now other than staffing. But the benchmarking that we do against other schools shows that we're not overstaffed. We haven't got huge numbers of staff compared to other schools. It's just...
Which again highlights its underfunding rather than...
Not overspending.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the local authority is in a very tricky position because they're not being given enough money to run our schools from the national government. So because the national government have cut the money that they're giving to schools by 8% in real terms, the local authority are really struggling to give us the money that we need to run the schools.
The Chancellor has announced that he'll be coming back to the House of Commons in the spring. I think March is most likely, and the spending review will then cover the 3 financial years which follow. And so that covers all areas of government spending, health, education. So schools are in the competition with the armed forces, with health, and with lots of other commitments. And of course, it's made more uncertain by the imminent potential Brexit fallout.
Would a change of government change things immediately?
Not immediately, but effectively a change of government will have an impact, because if a new government comes in that has a commitment to public spending, and I believe the last Labour manifesto, the Institute of Fiscal Studies, which is a pretty well-respected think tank, said that it was the biggest proposal to spend resources on public services for 40 years. And of that, £4 billion was allocated to education spending, not just for primaries, but secondaries and long-term education for adults who need to change career. And so, of course, that will help, but it will take a while for that money to come through. Even if a government is elected tomorrow, then it would take probably a year for that money to start to come into schools. So the budgetary situation as it applies now will not be instantly solved by a change of government. The other alternative, of course, is that the Conservatives who are currently in power, when they do their review of public spending, they agree to put more resources into education over the next 3-year period. And of course, then it means that schools know if money is coming in that 3-year period, they can at least start to plan for that, as opposed to at the moment, they're just planning to make further cuts, further reductions in spending, impact on staff, impact on children. And of course, the outcome for them long term will be worse.
I feel like a badge of shame, doesn't it? But actually, the reason we've got such a huge deficit is because up until now I've refused to make cuts and said this is the money I need for my... I mean, I am a very large school, so our budget is probably, I don't know, 4 million, something like that.
Would you be able to say how much would you need not to be in deficit? Just a...
£900,000. That's our deficit.